So hi, I'm Shamika Ravi, Vice President, Observer Research Foundation. When I was asked about Prime Minister Modi's last 20 years as an executive head of state and the country, and I was asked what my views were about the last 20 years, I started to look at the research that we have done and look at the empirical evidence that exists in terms of the achievements of the state of Gujarat as well as the country. Well, first thing, I think it's important to appreciate what a great challenge it is to balance economic growth with development, particularly in a liberal plural democracy, which is noisy and there is a resistance to most changes. So in that regard, I pulled out basically 5 key areas which I consider huge achievements of the Prime Minister. First and foremost, I think it is the transformational change and improvement of India's welfare architecture. In particular, I look at the Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and mobile connectivity that has essentially strengthened the welfare architecture in a way that targeting and effective transfer of benefits have been made much more efficient. This we have seen, by the way, happen even as recent as the pandemic itself. In fact, the state election of Bihar is almost like a litmus test because it happened within a few months of the national lockdown, which was quite stringent. And yet, when you combine Election Commission data with poverty data, we are able to show, and this is out in a peer-reviewed journal last year, we found that the poorer the constituency, the higher the probability of voting for the incumbent government, which is the BJP and the JDU. Now, this is remarkable, given just the nature of the pandemic and the kind of changes people were seeing in their day-to-day lives. So that itself is a testimony to the fact that having strong and effective welfare architecture can really prevent the kind of humanitarian crisis that this pandemic was expected to have and the kind of upheaval most people were expecting. That didn't happen. We have not had hunger deaths in India despite facing economic crisis in the first quarter, largely on account of the fact that there has been very effective transfer and effective targeting of beneficiaries. The second most important thing, I think, has been, from a longer term perspective, the Swachh Bharat. I think while it is not something that the mainstream media tends to pick up, or as economists, I think it is relatively understudied. Because as economists, we generally keep our focus on a few macro indicators. But if you look at the real economy of India, bringing down open defecation or giving access to over 100 million toilets within the first 4 or 5 years of governance, I think has been one of the biggest achievements of Prime Minister Modi. Now, besides, if you just look at hygiene and health indicators, it also has disproportionately greater impact on safety of women, particularly in rural areas. And this is borne again very well in the data. If you see that there has been a reduction of sexual assault by 22%. If you look at the incidence of rapes have come down by 14%, and these are largely associated with accessing toilets by women. So I think it is a phenomenal achievement, and I think it needs underscoring, because what the Prime Minister was able to do is really mobilize and galvanize the bureaucracy. And it became a mass movement. It became a people's movement. And it is something that needs underscoring and elaboration and emphasizing. I think the third most important thing, if I were to look at, is just the way India has dealt with the pandemic. While it is a global pandemic, remember, we are a resource-poor country. We are not a rich country. So while most people think and compare ourselves to the OECD rich nations, it's important to note that for a country like ours with limited public health infrastructure, it is quite a remarkable feat how quickly the testing architecture, if you look at the vaccination drive, today, more than 900 million people are fully vaccinated. That is a remarkable feat. And this is all on the back of really effective leadership and efficient management. Another aspect of Prime Minister Modi, which I think is overlooked, and I think, again, it needs emphasizing, because, again, repeatedly in our research, it comes out that women leaders under the BJP, and particular if you consider the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, they have come a very long way. While all national political parties have a constitution of promoting women, it is truly the BJP with its last 10 years or 15 years of internal party constitution and adhering to it and promoting women that has led to a remarkable number of women entering leadership position. But while most of research really looks at women voters, we have contributed to this research ourselves. Women are voting in large numbers. Women are contesting in very large numbers. There has been a 16-fold increase in the number of women contesting in the last 50 years. And yet, I think one of the most underrated aspect of women leadership is how women leaders engage within the parliament. It is not just the number of women, but also once you are elected a leader, how often do you ask questions? How many debates do you initiate? How many private member bills have you tabled? The kind of debates that you engage in. And here we do look at the PRS data, and it is a truly significant achievement that under this particular Prime Minister, not only have the BJP women MPs engaged in large numbers within the parliament, but they are asking questions of their own government. Women BJP MPs have asked the most number of questions to their own government compared to not only their male counterparts, but all aspects of the opposition, male or female. And this is, again, it's a measure of empowerment. It's a measure of truly women's representation coming to the fore. Now, what kind of questions do these women MPs ask? Typically health, education, when it comes to MSME sector, when it comes to employment. So these are core areas that concern ordinary citizens. So I think that is one remarkable feat which needs underscoring. Finally, I think it's important to look at the last 20 years of Gujarat. So we focus on the data from Gujarat, while of course most economists and political scientists have looked at how Gujarat has performed economically. Gujarat is an economic superpower in the country. But that's not all. In fact, it is really the balance of growth with development which makes his leadership truly disruptive and transformative. Gujarat has seen a 300% increase in net state domestic product. But that, I think, is a relatively well-known achievement. What is relatively unknown is the fact that it is one of the very few states in the country that has lowered its neonatal mortality by more than 50%, which means babies dying within 28 days of birth. Now, why is neonatal deaths such an important metric to look at? Well, first of all, it is one of the indicators that the Sustainable Development Goals look to achieve. As India and as all other countries, we are signatory to that. We are on our way to achieving those. But Gujarat has made a very significant jump of lowering neonatal deaths. Neonatal deaths are also important because it's a very good proxy for availability of health infrastructure or institutional care that is available to mothers and babies. So it remains, one of the core metric that we have been monitoring for all states. And again, here it is largely on account of Prime Minister Modi's leadership, where he has been able to balance economic growth with core development indicators. Once again, I think very important to note that while globally democracies are seeing pushback against globalization, democracies are under upheaval. It is very clear if you study the micro data, if you study the core data from the ground across sectors, as we have been doing. Indian democracy is getting stronger every day. And clearly what we are able to achieve is not only economic growth with development, but core areas of development which are, I think most of the time, they go unnoticed. And I think that is why I term, his tenure as micro-revolution. It is not just, the top-level macro indicators that are changing, but ground-level realities which are changing, which in essence are changing the lives of ordinary citizens of the country.